is Rebekah Scroggy. I am a registered nurse and an IBCLC, but probably most importantly, I am a mom to 2 kids. I am so beyond thrilled to be here with you and share some amazing superstar interviews with you all. We will be going over amazing topics like lactation, postpartum mental health, pelvic floor, and so much more. Just to make sure you don't miss anything, make sure to hit subscribe and follow us on all of our socials. We'll link them below. And as always, we want to know what you want to hear. So comment below any topics that you'd like us to cover. So now that we got that over with, here we go.
It's all right.
I can go my own way. See, Kaia, that's such great advice for all aspects of life. I love it.
My name's Kaia Lacy, and I'm a certified lactation counselor. I am, currently working towards my IBCLC, which took a long time to get to because, this is not the career path I saw for myself. But at 30 years old, I had my first son, and he was born perfectly healthy in this wonderful, ethereal vaginal birth where I felt like it was so natural and, something that I had so many expectations for birth and breastfeeding and, a lot of those like first mom isms where I thought, I have to birth a certain way, I have to feed a certain way. And a few weeks, into his time in this world, we were really struggling with feeding, and that really started at the beginning, but it just continued to just kind of tumbleweed until it got to this really bad point. And through so many doctor's visits and ER visits and just medical interventions, we found that I am not able to produce an amount of breast milk that is required for exclusive breastfeeding. And I have a condition called insufficient glandular tissue. So yeah, that was just, after my first baby 7 years ago, it really, I was in a dark place. It was a very difficult spiral as a new mom, especially with all these expectations I had for myself and all these, this list of what's right and wrong as far as, parenthood goes. And through that experience, I just learned so much about low milk supply and the prevalence of low milk supply and how impactful that is emotionally, logistically for feeding. And I became, through my own process, I grieved, what my body was not able to do, but then found myself, with my next baby, excited about breastfeeding and the prospect of like, how can I do this creatively? And, are there ways to feed with your own milk, even if you have low milk supply? And that connected me with the low milk supply community and with researchers. And it just really inspired me to kind of become the help that I didn't have after my first baby. And so that's how I got into this work. I have a creative background, and I just took a pivot and I said, well, I guess I'm just going to be a lactation consultant now, because there was, so there was that need that I saw in my own life, and that I wanted to provide for other people in similar scenarios. So that's the long story of how I got into this work and where we are now. And now I have a third baby who is, again, I have low milk supply. And again, I've been able to breastfeed long term, even with insufficient glandular tissue. So it's, I like spreading that good news that it's not all or nothing. And if, you have supports and if it feels good for you, it's totally fine to do it.
I love that.
7 years ago, I swear I thought I was the only person on earth who had this condition or who had low milk supply, right? Yeah. And I think that there was this argument in the past that, if we approach breastfeeding outside of the goal of exclusively breastfeeding, exclusively nursing, then we're going to see decreased breastfeeding rates, right?
Yeah.
And though, those are two facets that are really wonderful, exclusively breastfeeding when that's an available option, amazing, obviously, right? However, like, we've got to balance that with the reality that like 1 in 3 families are gonna not be exclusively breastfeeding while breastfeeding, right? And that's just what the data says.
Yeah.
And so in talking about these nuanced kind of different quote unquote approaches, I think that we're actually increasing the access to breastfeeding, and it, can be increasing the rates of it. Does the data show that? Not yet. I hope that, one day we have it, and it
Yeah.
will. But
Yeah.
I mean, this from your work, is that a lot of people, one of the reasons people will stop breastfeeding, think they don't have enough milk, or they'll, say, well, it's too difficult to exclusively breastfeed. So when we make the goal, the only goal and the only definition of successful breastfeeding is exclusively breastfeeding, less people are going to breastfeed, right? Because when that's not accessible to them, then they'll stop, because I'm not going to do anything that I feel like I can't do right.
Yeah.
If we lived in like Denmark 1748, sure, I think exclusively breastfeeding nursing would probably be a more accessible option, but we have to take it into consideration, like lifestyle factors,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
And the balance of all the things that we have to carry at once, because it's not
Yeah.
just sitting in a rocking chair by the fire while our partners are like herding the goats and bringing in firewood.
I
Like,
know. No.
life is a little bit heavier nowadays,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
but
100%. What exactly is the definition of low milk supply?
so you find a lot of different definitions throughout scientific literature, but they all pretty much are saying the same thing, which is that someone has the inability to sustain healthy growth in their infant by exclusive breastfeeding. So not producing enough milk is resulting in a stall in growth as far as weight gain or weight loss. And, there's, with low milk supply, it's so nuanced, right? Because you can see infant weight loss or a stall in growth for other reasons.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of times we kind of want to hold back on calling something low milk supply because we're afraid to, put that on someone, and then it becomes like we assume some self-fulfilling prophecy where now they're going to think they have low supply, which actually, giving more information and saying like, okay, this could be a possibility, let's look at the options here, is a much better approach, because then we're, we have a better ability to protect the breastfeeding relationship and support it, rather than saying like, oh, let's just wait and see, we don't know here. But, if a person is nursing or pumping efficiently, in the early days, like 8 to 10 times a day, if there are no milk transfer issues, so if baby is able to efficiently drain that milk from the breast, or using a pump that's got an efficient motor with appropriate flange sizing that you're responsive to, all of these kind of best practices checked off the list, and then we still are seeing there is a milk yield here that is not meeting the child's demands, that's low milk supply. It's really not, people will argue it all day long, but at the end of the day, it's not that nuanced. It's when you're not making enough milk for your baby to grow and thrive. Because there are different sources of low milk supply. So on one side of the spectrum, there is secondary low milk supply, which is much more common. We don't have a statistic for the prevalence of it. We know that up to 45% of parents worldwide report low milk supply. Do half of all people have it? I don't know that it's that high, but I do know that secondary low supply is more common within the two types that we see. So one of those types is secondary, and this has to do with low supply happening as a result of milk being inefficiently or ineffectively drained from the breast, right? And a lot of people will confuse this. They'll conflate this with, oh, well, you actually have enough supply. You just have to pump or nurse more. That's not what this is. Secondary low milk supply is actually after that kind of opportunity has passed, right? So when we have, let's say the proper mechanics in our breast, we have enough glandular tissue, our hormones are happy, our metabolic health is happy, we have the ability to exclusively breastfeed, but something is getting in the way of efficiently draining those breasts, whether it's, improper flange sizing or, not draining the breast overnight because somebody told you like baby can sleep 12 hours, it's fine. Or, so misinformation is a huge one here. Tongue ties, oral dysfunction, if baby has trouble getting that milk out of the breast, anything that's going to result in milk being left over consistently, right? When that happens, we actually have some of the milk factories inside our breast shut down and they stop producing milk. And that's called secondary low supply. Okay. On the other side, we have primary low supply. So secondary low supply are those like extrinsic factors that have to do with milk draining, right?
Yeah.
Primary low supply are those intrinsic factors. So that has to do with underlying maternal health. It can be hormonal, it can be metabolic, it can be anatomical. So mine, for instance, I have insufficient glandular tissue, which means that I just don't have, I do not have enough of those milk-making factories inside my breasts. My glandular tissue, I could be breastfeeding 24 hours a day and I still wouldn't make enough milk, right? That's one cause of primary low supply. There are a lot of them. There's thyroid dysfunction, PCOS symptoms like insulin resistance, high androgens. If you have a history of issues with fertility, especially if low progesterone's involved, luteal phase defect, that can be a cause. Basically, if you think about anything that's going to impact hormones and metabolic health, that can, not always, but it can cause primary low supply. So we have primary, which actually has a lot of causes, right?
Yeah.
And then we have secondary, which at its cellular level only has one cause. And that cause is that we have inactive prolactin receptors. So inactive milk-making factories inside our breasts, right?
Yeah.
Just to overload you with information.
I mean, I've heard of the primary and secondary as an IBCLC, we do all that basic information. So I've heard of that, but you did such a great job of like breaking that down. But for the secondary, is there a time frame where you're like, you've hit the secondary low milk supply and you can never come back from this?
Well, so it's really interesting because with secondary, and this was like a light bulb for me. I'm like, why don't they teach everyone this? So when you look at research about secondary low milk supply, what it is, it's the exact same mechanism responsible for weaning, right? So when you have secondary low milk supply, it's the same as partial weaning, unintended partial weaning, right? So some of these receptors, these prolactin receptors inside your breast have shut down. Prolactin receptors are the part of your glandular tissue. It's like your glandular tissue is just a bunch of clusters of grapes, right? And if you were to cut open one of those grapes, you would see it had all these kind of cells lined on the inside of that grape, right? All of these cells are prolactin receptors. When they get the signal, prolactin shoots them up with milk, a bunch of milk is made, it goes into the grape, and then it waits until, you're ready to empty the breast, baby suckles, it gets squeezed out of the grape, if that makes sense. So if we have that grape cut open, it has all these little cells and, milk is left over. Some of these start to shut down. Okay. Only some of them, which is why we don't see like someone go from making a lot of milk to then they're just completely dry, because that's not how weaning happens. That's not how the involution of these receptors happens. And so with secondary low supply, some of these little factories are shut down, right?
Yeah.
The mechanism to try and increase supply or turn these receptors back on is actually relactation. So,
Oh, okay.
yeah, it is technically relactation because you're trying to turn those milk factories that turned off, you're trying to turn them back on. And this is considered relactation. So when we look at the data on relactation, can everybody relactate? Does everybody relactate to the point they can exclusively breastfeed? Well, we know that there are some factors that can make it easier versus harder for some people, right? If you are under 6 weeks postpartum, you have a higher likelihood of relactating to the point of exclusively breastfeeding. If you are under 25 years old, that's another positive association. Unfortunately for like old mommies like me, it's just like, but there are other things, if you're geriatric like I am at 37. No, I'm just kidding. The good news is with relactation and low supply, we know that 100% of people can relactate. However, and this is the big however, the volume that you can recover is super, super individual. And one thing about research, we have these factors like under 25 or under 6 weeks where we know that there's a higher likelihood to recover that. However, we don't exactly understand yet why some people can, say somebody weaned 6 months ago, they start relactating, they can get 20 ounces a day. And then somebody, say that they had some secondary low supply and a month later are trying to relactate and they can only recover, 5 or 6 ounces. We don't know why that is yet. Know that if you have secondary low supply, you can always increase it, but the amount that you can increase it is going to be really individual. And we also have really good timelines for how we should see that increase happening, right? So, and I always tell this to clients, it's that because you will meet people that are like, yeah, I've been triple feeding for like 3 months, or I've been, doing extra pumping for X amount of time. And I'm just like, oh, honey,
I know.
you're trying to get prolactin high enough that it inspires those factories to be like, okay, I guess I'll come back and make more milk for you, right?
Love
And
it.
so once we're incorporating these practices to try to increase prolactin, meaning what are the things that are easiest? More nipple stimulation, more milk draining, right? So we're pumping more, we're hand expressing, we're hitting those high prolactin windows, so not missing overnight pumps, etc. Once we have started those practices, we will know in 1 week whether or not that's going to help us. If we get to, once you start those, you have to consistently do them for about 3 to 5 days before you see any increase, which is the most annoying thing in the world, right?
So mentally hard.
Yeah. And then, if you get to 7 days and you don't see any increase in supply, that's a good time to look at primary low milk supply because we should, right? We know that 100% of people with secondary can relactate. We should see some increase within 7 days. Otherwise, we know it's either primary low supply or maybe we're really far into postpartum and our receptors are just not going to respond right now. Say you get to 7 days and you're like, wow, I'm like 6 ounces higher right now. Then great. You know that you have secondary low supply. You know that increasing the frequency and efficiency is helping you. Then just continue to reassess every few days until you don't see supply increasing. And then, just maintain practices that are, 8 to 10 removals and efficiently draining the breast, get your pump parts and, all those best practices, right?
Yeah.
The thing that is hard with secondary low supply is that if you don't know what caused it, then you're going to be doing a lot of work and you may increase your supply a lot. But if we don't get that root cause figured out, then you might go back down to secondary low supply again, right? So it's really important. And this is why an IBCLC is really wonderful is that, real, and this, there are amazing IBCLCs and there are some that are like, okay, let's maybe find you someone that could help you maybe a bit more. I really love IBCLCs that have additional education in oral rehabilitation with that oral function, because a lot of times we do see some sort of transfer issue, whether it's like a suckling issue, whether it's a tongue tie, whether it's disorganized suck, something that is getting in the way of efficiently draining that breast. So as you're kind of doing these extra pumps or extra stimulation, whatever it is, it's really important to make sure you're getting that help to address the underlying cause. So it doesn't happen again, which, I mean, the easier cases are those cases where it's like, oh, well, my pediatrician told me that baby should sleep through the night, so I didn't pump from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Like, in those scenarios, sometimes it's easier because you're like, oh, okay, well, it just means, overnight a little more stimulation. But I will say with primary low supply, it's less common than it is with secondary that you can treat it and then exclusively breastfeed, right? For a lot of us with primary low supply, one, it's not going to be just one cause. Like we think, I have primary low supply, it's because of IGT, or I have it's because of insulin resistance. A lot of times, it's actually going to be multifactorial, right? Because it's not just about what's happening currently in our bodies, it's what has happened during the most influential times of breast development, which are puberty, pregnancy, and now postpartum, right? So, for example, somebody with insulin resistance in puberty, and this is actually how I got IGT. When I was 9 years old, I was a plump little cherry that weighed 250 pounds in fifth grade. And so I had really bad insulin resistance. And because I was experiencing that during puberty, it actually affected my breast development, and that caused insufficient glandular tissue. So then when I'm going into pregnancy and postpartum with a lower baseline to grow off of, I'm then in postpartum with my first baby. I had IGT, but I also had insulin resistance still. And, even if I fix the insulin resistance, I can't fix the fact that I have insufficient glandular tissue, right? So it's really nuanced with primary low supply, and it's very frustrating too, because we're given this information that it's like, okay, primary low supply, you have one cause, when a lot of times we got to look at the full picture. And the thing that's really frustrating is that you can have both. You can have primary low supply and you can have secondary low supply, right? You can have insufficient glandular tissue and you can have a baby that has a tongue tie who's not efficiently draining the breast, right? So,
and then to add on to that, you can have a provider that doesn't know any of this.
Yes. My experience, which I just had so many providers. I had lactation consultants, I had pediatricians, I had, those people that I was getting blood tests with in the ER for bilirubin with my son, who was just struggling. None of these people knew anything about insufficient glandular tissue. And it was really something where my son had lost so much weight that by the time he was 1 month old, he was diagnosed with failure to thrive, and he had to be treated because he was literally starving, right? And I had just been told throughout those first weeks, I was meeting with the lactation consultant twice a week, and it was like, just bring baby to breast, and if you want it, it's going to work, and we just need to continue triple feeding and just give 1 ounce supplement each feed. And, following all these directions, and the pediatrician just saying, let's just continue working with your lactation consultant, until it culminated in this really tragic, awful, honestly traumatic kind of event for us, right?
100%.
And when I connected with the low supply community, and I found that like my story is not rare, which is so heartbreaking. Like, it makes me emotional to think of how many families have gone through similar experiences. That was the thing that really spurred me on to being like, okay, we are going to get on this, and I'm going to, go be the little low supply soldier, because we need it out there, and it's really unfortunate because a lot of providers there is actually a lot of research about low supply.
Mm-hmm.
The issue is that it takes so much time for research to be integrated into provider curriculum. So we're living in this Google age where like so many of us can, we can find that research and we can learn a lot of things, but our OBGYNs, our midwives, a lot of our lactation consultants even aren't going to be really well versed in these things because the research has come out in the last 10 years, right? And that's not going to be integrated into curriculum for, I think, 16 years is the average time, right? And so we're kind of living in that lag. But one of the great things about that is that, with social media, with the internet, with like the way we can all connect virtually, there are so many IBCLCs and so many different people within the lactation field that have a similar heart for this and want to support it and are like, I want to learn, and can be such amazing supports for these families. It's just a matter of like getting this information into their hands so that we have less stories like mine. You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I know I worked in the hospital for like 8 months as a lactation consultant, which is hard enough as it is, but there were a handful of times where I had to go into a client or to a patient's room and talk to them about the possibility of them having low milk supply. And you absolutely nailed it on the head. I felt like I was giving like a death sentence. I was like, this is not, and it almost, I think it happened like 3 times. And I think only one of those people, and I don't even know if she really was, I was more upset than she was because I was like, I'm so sorry that I can't help you. And I feel like hopefully as a whole, the lactation community can say, I feel so bad about this because I want to be able to help you and I can't fix this. But education, that's how we learn more and we can help more. So I love that you're talking about that.
Because I think that one thing that's really hard within the low supply community is that we oftentimes will face this narrative of like, okay, we just have to fix it. We just have to fix it, right? And when somebody can't exclusively breastfeed, it's like, oh, what an absolute tragedy. How terrible that is. How awful. What a nightmare. And it's like, yes, we do feel some semblance of that within our own processing. But it really doesn't help that like the culture around us is telling us that this is the worst possible thing that could ever happen, right?
Yes.
And so, I find it to be so much more empowering to approach it from the perspective of like, our bodies have limitations. There are, and this is, I hate this whole like return to nature, the biological norm. Yes, it's wonderful, but guess what? Since time began, there are people who have not been able to exclusively breastfeed. And we have had wet nurses, we have used mammal milks, we have done so many things. And, low supply, though it is not ideal, has always existed in some form, right? And I think that, empowering parents, part of that is not catastrophizing and making this huge tragedy of low milk supply, but saying like, okay, we have barriers. We have these physical barriers that we have to work within. But if you have that desire to breastfeed, I want to support you and we can maximize whatever milk your body is capable of making while making sure that you have a good balance with, okay, I'm feeling joyful in this. This is feeling good. It's feeling manageable and sustainable, because there is a way to do that. And yes, there is grief involved in accepting that fact for some people that like, okay, my body can't do this thing that I was told it could do, right? But I think that when we empower parents with the knowledge that this isn't a death sentence, right? Then it makes such a huge difference. That was one of the reasons, with my first, I weaned at like 3 or 4 months because I was so depressed. Because I was like, I can't exclusively breastfeed. I'm a failure. I've done everything wrong. Obviously, I did this to myself. And I looked at not being able to exclusively breastfeed as a failure, right? And that's because of all the pressures that
society, culture, all the things. Yes,
exactly. which people will argue all day long. Oh, there's no pressure to breastfeed. Okay, cool. Let me visit your city because it's not what it's
Yeah.
like here.
Yeah.
But once I was like, you know what? Any amount of breast milk is breastfeeding, whether it's nursing, whether it's pumping, there are still benefits. If I want to do this, I can do it my own way. There are no hard and fast rules. I'm not kicked out of some breastfeeding club. It doesn't matter. And in that, experience, like you can, and you need more support, you need more information, but it can be done if you want it to, right? And it's just, I think it's just like being able to exist in that nuance, which can be scary for us, but can be a really wonderful thing,
Yeah. Yeah.
I just want to empower people to like make their own decisions and feel like they can. Because one of those things, especially with low supply, one of the things that's so hard is you feel voiceless. You feel like you don't have any control. Your choice to breastfeed has been taken away from you. And like that, losing that sense of autonomy, especially as you are becoming a first-time mom, like first experience with parenthood, that is so awful, And so I want people to know, like, there is a choice that was taken away from you, but I want you to know you do have other choices, and I want you to feel empowered to be able to decide what's best for you, and it's just, it's just these rules.
I know.
These rules.
Some things that people could do if they are concerned about low milk supply? Like, obviously you said work with somebody who, like an IBCLC, or somebody who has that extra training, experience, all that things. But sometimes you have to schedule that, find the person, blah, 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 blah.
Sure.
So is there anything that you recommend people do as like a first step if you're thinking, oh, I might have low milk supply?
One thing, so if somebody is like, oh, I'm concerned about my supply, I see that, I'm feeling like baby's not gaining enough weight, or, it's most ideal to meet with someone, obviously. I do like to tell people that, one thing that is really wonderful that's come out in recent years is that you can get virtual IBCLC appointments covered by insurance. So that's one thing to look at with, the Lactation Network, and like looking through their providers, trying to get an appointment there. If you are to the point where you're like, I don't want to meet a lactation consultant, or this is too overwhelming, I don't know what to do. I would say, one, if you're concerned about weight, always just meet with your pediatrician, because even though it's scary, we don't want to avoid it, because we got to take this head on, and we can, but if you're thinking you've had just like a dip, maybe you have some secondary low supply, then that would be a time to, if you want to increase supply, incorporate some of those measures with like, okay, I'm going to throw in a few extra pumps in the earlier half of the day, because that's when prolactin's higher, right? And we're trying to remember, with secondary low supply, we're trying to inspire prolactin to be high enough that it turns these guys back on. If you've tried that and you're like, that's not doing anything, I'm still, I've been supplementing with formula or donor milk for however long. Sometimes it's not even about increasing the supply. Sometimes it's about, I want to know what's going on with my body, right?
Yeah.
And in that scenario, there are certain tests that we can do that can give us greater insight into what's happening with our body. Now, it can be really difficult with testing if you don't have a midwife or an OBGYN or a family care doctor, whoever your main provider is. If they're not super on board with getting tests done, it's really a gamble. Like, I have seen some people are like, yes, we'll order every single test you would ever desire. And then some won't even order a thyroid panel, and so that can be difficult. But again, if you have an IBCLC, they can help advocate for you and refer for those tests, which is really helpful. If you want to do those tests on your own, you can. If you want to know kind of what those tests are, the most common would be prolactin, which is a 2-draw test, insulin resistance, which is A1C, a full thyroid panel, just kind of starting there. And there's more instruction regarding that on the website for the Low Milk Supply Foundation, which is a nonprofit. There's provider resources there. There's a lot of kind of digging you can do. thinks they have low milk supply, I always say, let's make sure we're hitting all the best practices. So, get those like 8 to 10 pumps or nursing sessions a day. If we don't know if there's transfer issues, get help to assess for that. Because I don't want you to have to work on increasing your supply and then it go back down if there are those issues, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, seeing if we can get those tests done. And then, say we do those in timelines. Okay, we've gone a week, we're not increasing supply. Throw secondary out then. Okay, we don't have to worry about that. We do primary treatments and we've increased supply a little bit. There is a point where you check these things off and you say, I have checked it off the list. I have done the thing. And now my supply is what my supply is. And I'm going to figure out, how do I use the supply that I have without continually, we don't need to continually chase ounces, right? So in the low supply community, there's so often this emphasis on like, let's fix it. Let's get your milk supply higher. Let's do. Yeah. And the thing is, if you spend your entire breastfeeding experience feeling inadequate in what you produce and feeling like you have to continually try to do more, you are not going to enjoy breastfeeding. Right. And so,
or the baby stage, either one.
No,
like you're not going to enjoy your baby either.
Exactly. And so I like to tell people, okay, let's do a timeline for secondary low supply. We're going to do a 1 week trial timeline to see how it works. Okay. For primary, we have a little bit of a longer timeline, right? Because it can take a few weeks for treatments to happen. It can take, a couple months. We might be doing these like, kind of extra things like using an at-breast supplementer like a Lactate or, taking extra supplements or whatever. And I say like, okay, well, with that, like, put your timeline there. For me, it's always like 2 to 3 months where I'm going to do like, I'm going to like maximize supply as much as I can. And then it's checked off the list. You've done it. And now we just say, okay, do I want to continue super frequent nursing sessions with hand expressing in between some of them? Do I want to prioritize nursing to sleep or pumping as much milk as I can? You get to figure out what is the priority for you. For me, my priority has always been like, I want to strengthen those positive breast associations. And do like, a lot of comfort nursing to sleep, whatever, because that's the thing I want to sustain even after year 1. Right. And so, for me, it's always been, I'm going to use an at-breast supplementer for a couple months, and then I'm going to switch to bottles and boob, and then, just figure out my thing. But for other people, especially when you're not as like I'm in a very lucky position where I have been home with all my kids and I'm able to just like feed full time, right? For some people, if you're going to work, your priorities might be, I want to nurse in the morning, I want to nurse at bedtime, and I'm going to pump for the rest. And, I want to be able to get a 5-hour stretch of sleep in the earlier part of the night. So it might be some things that will decrease supply a little bit. But if it makes it more sustainable for you, if it enables you to continue breastfeeding, that's okay. You don't have to be like balls to the wall, like we're gonna do,
the whole time.
I mean, and I say this as a person who did it, right? I say this as a person who, for the last, 20 months, and with my last child, like I did all the maximizing things. I nursed 12 times a day. I did a bottle every time, in the daytime, like with the smallest supplement, and then I at-breast supplemented. I have been the person who maximized my supply. And because I know how intensive that is, I know that it's not going to be the right thing for everyone. And I think that if we're walking around telling people like, oh, well, you can just use an at-breast supplementer, or, oh, well, you can just give a bottle after every single feed, like we just, okay, are you going to come to my house and do that? It's just, it's a lot. So I want people to know that they have options, and maximizing supply, we can make that a priority for a month, 2 months, 3 months, maybe 12 months for some of us. But sometimes our priorities are also going to change, and that's okay too. and
Mm-hmm.
figuring out, constantly just kind of checking in and saying, what is the priority for me right now? What is the thing that I need to be able to bond with my child to feel like I'm able and equipped to perform the tasks of motherhood and being a parent? What is going to be accessible to us and feels good as a family? And it's individual for everybody, right?
Is there any supplements or foods that support milk production that you usually recommend? Or is it a social media myth to eat a whole package of Oreos to help your milk supply boost?
Okay, so don't eat a whole package of Oreos. Unless you really, really want to, but you might not feel so good after, honestly. That's quite a lot of sugar. Um, so the thing is with galactagogues,
Mm-hmm.
it's one of those things where, you know what, I have thrown the kitchen sink at low supply, especially as being someone who has primary low supply. And, you know, in those earlier days, we have such desperation where we're like, I'll take anything, I'll do anything. At one point, I was like, mother's milk tea, moringa, shot of barley, lactation
Mm-hmm.
cookies, all these things. And they didn't do anything for me. And that's
Yeah.
because I didn't have a shatavari deficiency, right? I
Yeah.
had insufficient glandular tissue. And
Yeah.
so, in the instances where galactagogues may be supportive, um, for some people with prolactin deficiency, they might find, oh, if I take moringa, moringa helps increase prolactin. But I'll tell you what, if you have primary low supply and you have a prolactin deficiency, moringa
Mhm.
is not going to be that helpful. It's
Yeah.
maybe we'll give you a little bit, but let's look at like, are there perhaps medical interventions that may be more helpful, right?
Yeah.
The same thing with, insulin resistance. Are there certain, black seed oil is one, or, we hear about oats a lot
Yeah.
because
All the
of,
time.
insulin sensitizing properties. Okay, well, there's also like metformin or
Yeah.
myoinositol, and these are things
Yeah.
that will actually really impact your insulin sensitivity and will increase your
Yeah.
supply. So I'm all about like, yes, galactagogues can be nice for, like some of us just like want to take something because we feel productive doing it. Great.
Mm-hmm.
But everyone should know that like if you don't if you don't establish what the underlying cause is, then
Mm-hmm.
it's like taking, it's like having a headache and being like, I need to take some vitamin C. Like it just doesn't,
Yeah.
what's
Not going to actually do something. Yeah.
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 So it's best to kind of have an understanding of what the underlying cause is, and maybe there are supplements that can support that, right? But yeah, the whole thing, I personally have a big beef with social media galactagogues because these things where it's like, oh, look, I went from 1 ounce to 10 ounces taking this supplement. I'm like, bull bleep. Because it's not true. It's not
Yeah,
true.
I know. I know. The people who are like, you just have to eat a handful of Oreos and drink a blue body armor and, dance naked under the moon every night and you'll have 20 ounces every single time you pump.
I
I
wish.
hate it so
I
much. I hate it so
wish.
much.
I wish,
You do it every night, wouldn't you?
Yeah. And like, yeah, it's just, it all has to do with root cause. If eating a bunch of Oreos somehow helps your milk supply, then maybe you just like were having 1,000 calories a day and needed to up it. If you're
Yes.
starving,
Yes.
you know,
That is a very good point. Yeah.
um, do what makes you happy, but don't fall into, there's a lot of predatory marketing when it comes to, oh, just take this one tea or this drink or, oh, I have this powder lactation latte or whatever. Those things
Yeah.
are like such, sorry, but they're garbage because
Yeah.
they, for the majority of people, they're not going to be treating any sort of actual cause of low supply. It's just,
Yeah.
yeah. Here's one thing. I will say this. If you are like, I want to help my prolactin out a bit, great. Drink some hop water or drink non-alcoholic beer. That's going to
Mm,
increase your prolactin.
okay.
If you want to help with insulin resistance, I want you to look at how much sugar you're taking in and try to start with a protein in the morning. Try to keep that sugar at bay, because anything that's going to be spiking your glucose is going to decrease that sensitivity, right?
Mm,
Eating oatmeal can help because the beta glucans in that. But also, like, don't be eating so much oatmeal that you become like an oat person, like I did. Complementary fun things we can do. It's not something we
yeah.
should rely on as that is going to be like so amazingly impactful that we're like writing a blog about it.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you usually help navigate those feelings of guilt or disappointment or feeling like a failure that often come alongside when we're dealing with low milk supply?
I mean, I think a big part of it is just like being able to talk about it. You
Yeah.
know, I have a lot of time that I spend with clients is just like, I want you to tell me, like, how are you feeling? Like,
Yeah.
how does this feel? Because a lot of times there's so much focus on the baby and like the feeding
Mm,
logistics where it's like, okay, hi, tell me about how many times do you pump a day? What is your pump? What is your flange size?
mhm.
Okay, this is what you need to do. And we focus on like the XYZ of feeding, and we don't do enough checking in with like, hey, how are you feeling about feeding? You
Yeah.
know, like,
Yeah.
and I'll ask that to clients, and I mean, 5 out of 10 times it's just like tears, right?
Yeah.
Because we're not checking in with each other and we're just
Yeah.
throwing so much at each other. And I think really just being able to talk about it is so impactful, right? And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
you know, if you're struggling with that guilt and feeling like shame and just sadness and like you have that sorrow, I think one of the best things you can do is find people that you can talk to. And, you know, for me, that started with there is a community online called the IGT and Low Milk Supply Support Group. And this
Mhm.
is a Facebook group, a really wonderful community. It's for people with primary low supply. So it's not as great
Mhm.
for those with secondary low supply because you won't be able to join. They screen
Yeah.
everybody. But especially for those of us with insufficient glandular tissue or, you know, any sort of metabolic hormonal influence that we cannot exclusively breastfeed,
Yeah.
this can be a really impactful community for a lot of people because you're connecting with people who have been through the same thing, right?
Yeah.
Uh, the majority of us, what's going to be most comforting is being heard, is actually being heard and not being, because so many of us we'll tell people our story and it's like, oh, well, have you tried this? Have you tried this? Are you sure
Yeah.
you have low milk supply? Are
Yeah.
you, you know, you must be doing XYZ wrong. When we're able to just share and be heard, that in and of itself is very healing. So,
Yeah.
you know, really seeking support from people that can hear you is one of the
Yeah.
biggest things I find. I think the second biggest thing that I find to be healing is learning about your body, you know. For me, when I found out that I had insufficient glandular tissue, one of the things that helped me was understanding that condition.
Yeah.
Because once I understood the cause of low supply, it's like you understand that it's not because of you. You know, this is like a
Yes.
biological condition, right? And so
Yes.
really learning about lactation, really learning about, you know, that underlying health influence, that can be really, really impactful as well because you're able to separate this blame,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And saying, I have done this. I have
Yeah.
done everything that I can do. I have controlled all the things I can control. And at this point, I am going to make an active choice to choose what is sustainable, to choose what is positive, to move forward in a way where I am not insufficient, where
Yeah.
whatever I have is enough and I have barriers that I can work within and I'm going to do it because I can and that's what I choose, right? And so
Yeah.
kind of like taking that power back is really big.
That's so impactful. I feel like motherhood is so hard as in of itself, where you constantly, especially with social media, which is great because we get to learn from amazing people like you. But it also can be really hard because you can constantly find yourself in this like comparing mode of like, am I doing enough? Did I do all the things? Am I raising my kids to hate me? Like, and it's never ending. And that was really impactful how you said that. So I really appreciate that. If they want to work with you or learn more of all this amazing information about low milk supply.
Oh my God, Rebekah, that was such a seamless segue. Well done. So I'm on Instagram as Low Supply Mom. And apart from that, it's Low Supply Mom on Instagram or lowsupply.com.
Okay.
Lowmilksupplyfoundation.org has a lot of resources for both families and providers. If you're listening and you're an IBCLC or, lactation counselor, breastfeeding counselor, whatever, and you just want to learn more, it's a great website to start at. So I would encourage everybody to check it out.
What is one thing that you would tell your younger self about breastfeeding?
Oh, God. Oh, that's hard. I think about, and I said this earlier, I had so many expectations before a baby, right? And it was, I'm going to exclusively breastfeed, and I would never give my child formula. That's poison. And I'm going to breastfeed him until he's 4, and I'm only going to, God, I had so many expectations. And I think that, if I were to sit down that like 29-year-old pregnant lady, I would probably let her know that it's okay to go your own way.
Yeah.
I think that I got really wrapped up in all the things that I wanted to do right because I was told that these are the right things to do. And it was like the biggest slice of humble pie, but also like so sorrow, grief filled. And I think just knowing like it's okay if what your experience looks like is so much different than others. It's not just okay. That's such a beautiful and wonderful thing. And it's okay to go your own way,
Yeah, I really like that. That's such great advice.
You can go your own way. It's all right.
I can go my own way. See, Kaia, that's such great advice for all aspects of life. I love it.